Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from around the globe, wherever you're logging in. And welcome to this important side event. As you all know, that this is the first day of the Global Disability Summit 2022. We had an engaging 3 hours of session, and then there were some technical difficulties, but at the same time, we got a chance to listen to important speakers, prime ministers, presidents, as well as kings. And this event which we have is very crucial. It's on the theme of tracking inclusion of persons with disabilities and how the money is being spent. My name is Gagan Chabra. I'm the project manager for inclusion at the Atlas Alliance, and I'm based in Oslo, Norway. And a brief visual description about myself before I hand it over to Morten. I am a blind person. I'm wearing a black buttoned-up shirt along with a black jumper, gray jacket. I have long curly dark hair, and you might be able to see the Atlas logo behind me. And now, as I mentioned, that it's the theme of tracking and monitoring inclusion is so crucial, because one thing is to spend the money and the other thing is to know where that money is being spent on. And Norway spends almost $4 billion every year on international development aid, and less than 3% of it is disability inclusive. So the reason why we know that is because there's an effort which is being made to track it, that where is that money being spent? And that's what we've got to be focused on. And today we have excellent panelists, stellar panelists, right from researchers, academia, to UNICEF, multilateral agencies, to the United Nations Human High Commission on Refugees, as well as NURAD donor and the DPO partners. And as I always say, that this is an intercontinental dialogue. It's a dialogue which is taking place between Norway, Switzerland, Uganda, and United States, and you all are participating in. That's fantastic. A brief note of housekeeping from my end. This event is getting recorded, as well as there is international sign language interpretation services which is being taken place, and there will be live captioning as well for accessibility purposes. So we are looking forward to engage with all the important panelists who are present there. So I gave a broad introduction, and now I would like to invite Morten Eriksen, the Executive Director of the Atlas Alliance, to give a more specific, particular introduction on the theme of tracking disability inclusion across multilateral agencies and international development aid. Morten, the floor is yours.
It's nice to see you. Welcome to this meeting. I hope you've had a very good and exciting day at the Global Disability Summit today, despite some technical challenges. My name is Morten Eriksen. I'm the director of the Atlas Alliance, and I'm especially happy and proud that you would join us for this side event today. Because the issue at stake for me, I think the question of tracking inclusion and trying to trace the way okay, sorry, I'm supposed to share. Can you see my screen now?
No, we are not able to see it right now.
Okay. The issue of tracking inclusion is so important because there are so many intentions, and we are willing. We hear a lot of goodwill when it comes to disability inclusion and disability rights. But we need to know what are we doing, where are we today when it comes to inclusion. And when I started in the Atlas Alliance in 2013, the first important document I read was from NORAD in 2012. And NORAD itself had then gone through Norwegian development aid from the year 2000 until 2010. And there were quite some surprising experience and knowledge that came up, because even though we all know we as persons with disabilities, we are 15% of the world's population. 800 million live in the global south. NORAD documented that the support mainstream or targeted persons with disabilities was extremely low. And when they showed the mainstream inclusion work, we were talking about less than 1% of Norwegian development aid that was mainstream. And when they looked at the targeted, it was down to 0.5% in 2010. So for the last years, we have worked on tracking inclusion. In 2017, we had FAFO making a report for us, showing that it was very difficult to follow the money and see to what extent could we document inclusion. NORAD this year is launching a big report. The numbers were released last year, and then they could show that the targeted amount was going a bit up to about 0.7%, and the mainstreamed effort was getting close to 3%. Still, that's very low, very low. And if we turn it around, we have to ask, does that actually mean that 97% of Norwegian disability support excludes persons with disabilities? It's probably not that dark, but today we have a FAFO report digging more into this issue, because one thing is the question of numbers, another thing is the question of how do we do it, how do we work? And then we have both UNICEF and UNHCR. We are happy that you would join us, and we look forward both to hear the presentation from FAFO, and also have a dialogue with UNICEF and UNHCR. We have some challenges from our Oslo studio right now. There's a fire alarm going on, but I think we will just go on and we'll see.
Yes, Morten, thank you for underscoring it. But this shows our commitment towards disability inclusion and towards tracking inclusion as well, and towards this theme of a Global Disability Summit, that even though the fire alarm is going along, we are making a conscientious effort to continue the event. So thank you for setting the stage, Morten. And now I would like to invite the two researchers, Arne Kielland and Mona, for a presentation about their phenomenal report, which was commissioned by the Atlas Alliance on tracking disability inclusion across 3 multilateral organizations, the UNICEF, World Bank, and UNHCR. Mona and Arne, the floor is yours. Take it away. Thank you.
So first of all, my name is Arne Kielland. I am a sociologist by profession. I have been working with disability issues on and off for at least 20 years, learning some hard lessons from Judy Human at the World Bank about 20 years ago. So I'm very pleased to be here on behalf of FAFO. Also, I'd like to say that we're grateful for having had the opportunity that you entrusted us with again, taking a closer look at what is a really important topic, which is tracking and accountability of funding going to disabled persons. We're also humbled because we knew this would not be a straightforward assignment. And of course, as Mona will get into, very appreciative of the representatives for the different organizations who have helped inform us in the work that my colleagues did with this report. Before we start, I'd like to congratulate the new Norwegian government with agreeing to integrate the CRPD into Norwegian law. That's great. And of course, I also heard that they were sharing the new strategy, the Norwegian strategy, today. Keywords: mainstreaming, systematic inclusion, social change, integration as the main concept. I think they're very much in line with the rest of the international community in this priority. Although this much said, I had the very same reaction as you, Morten, and I was about to post exactly what you posted today, that the way the new strategy was presented, it could sound as if earmarking was somehow confused with the idea of charity. So, like you, Morten, I hope that was a misunderstanding and it was not an example of political rhetoric, because exactly the difference between targeted and mainstreaming disability in development has very big consequences for tracking purposes. I'm going to leave the floor to Mona now to present the report briefly, and then I'll get back to you guys at the end of our slot.
Yes, thank you, Anne. So let me start to present this report by specifying that this is a rather limited study, both regarding resources and time frame. It's not a study of the three multilateral organizations presented in the report, but we are just gathering some examples from these organizations and gave them an opportunity to explain to us how they report on disability inclusion and also to send us their reports. We had no access to internal documents and systems, but approach open, accessible information. And we found, as Morten said, very little that very little disability inclusion was reported. This does not mean that the three organizations do not have more data and results that they could report on, but this is what is available and transparent right now. We selected the two countries, Uganda and Niger, and again, I would like to there's something happens on my screen. I'm very sorry about it, but I would like to emphasize that it's not a study of these three countries, or these two countries, and it's not a study of the organizations in these countries. I'm so sorry about this. Let me try again here. Yeah. We have identified 4 important tools to track disability inclusion. It's the Washington Group short sets of questions. 2, the OECD DAC marker, disability marker for reporting on development cooperation. 3, strategies and commitments. And 4, the UNICEF program performance management system called Insight. And in the report, we discussed experiences with these tools. First, the Washington Group questions. It is used by both the World Bank and UNICEF, who are asking cooperation partners to use these questions in censuses and national household surveys. Used this way, the Washington questions cannot be used to track inclusion. It only gives information about prevalence of disabled persons in a population, so it can create a baseline. However, the questions can track inclusion if it's used in a particular context for a particular group of persons. For example, a refugee population you can find out if disabled refugees are included in service delivery and protection. Likewise, in schools and education programs, you can find out if disabled students are included. So the second tool is the OECD DAC disability marker. This marker can track disability inclusion in development projects. It was developed to hold donors accountable towards the CRPD, and the SDGs, and also allow for comparison between donors. But OECD is a European institution, and this marker is mostly used for bilateral aid by EU donors. Yet Australia, Canada, and Norway are also using this marker. The UNICEF system reports to the DAC marker once a year and can align to the DAC marker because the indicators are not so different. But otherwise, the 3 multilateral donors do not use the DAC marker. There are also some challenges with the marker. First of all, it's applied voluntarily, so many projects will not be assessed against it. And second, it reports on intentions in plans and not on results. So to the third tool, strategies and commitments, we have looked into the UN strategy for disability inclusion. And it recognized that the data gap is a barrier to assess disability inclusion. So they have developed an accountability framework, indicators, and a scorecard that all UN entities are required to report on. And the UN has produced 2 progress reports on this. Also, the World Bank has developed a disability and accountability framework, and collecting data is also a part of this strategy. So to the last tool, the UNICEF Insight System. This is a system that links information of activities, results, expenditure directly to goals and targets in the strategic plan. But I think perhaps UNICEF will talk more in detail about this later. I just want to mention that although the system appears complex, it was reported by all our informants to be fairly easy to use. Yet, lack of knowledge locally, particularly on indicators and input to the system, was reported to be a challenge. So let me talk briefly about challenges. Lack of knowledge locally was a challenge among staff in all 3 organizations. It is not to say that local staff was not dedicated and knowledgeable and did a lot of hard work, but that they lack knowledge regarding certain aspects of disability, the organization's strategies, and the use of monitoring systems. So this leads to the second point, need for training. There is a need for training on disability, what it is, how to recognize it. It's a need for training on the organization's strategies and commitments and the monitoring systems. This need for training was also a conclusion in the 2025 UN disability, the UN strategy for disability report. Third, we want to mention that stigma was a recurrent theme in our interviews. Stigma makes challenges for identifying disability, particularly less visible disabilities, and this had the implication for both tracking and baselines. So this gives us practical challenges for successful monitoring and tracking disability inclusion. I will not go into detail of these challenges now, but perhaps we will have some time to discuss this later today. Let me then conclude. Efforts to track inclusion has seen some progress since the first Global Disability Summit in 2018. New policies, strategies, and commitments have moved tracking of inclusion forward. Yet, for example, Norway, using the DAC marker, was, as Morten said, only able to track a disability inclusion in less than 3% of its projects. And the UNICEF's impressive InSight system was only able to track 1% of the children they estimate to be disabled. And for the numbers we found for the UNHCR made us able to track inclusion for about 0.3% of the estimated number of persons with disability. Although this number only includes targeted efforts, and the numbers for inclusive interventions are still missing. The World Bank told us that they were not able to find these numbers at all. So this tells us that it's still a long way to go before inclusion of disabled persons in development and humanitarian aid can be tracked. Thank you. And I give the word back to Anne.
Thank you, Mona. It has become a cliche in the developing world and in many other sectors, I suppose, that what cannot be measured or counted or reported on will not be done. It will not be given priority. It's a cliche. It's to some extent yet the truth. Question is, how do we meaningfully track inclusion when more donors are moving towards mainstreaming their activities? I did have an exchange with a DPO in Niger. I work a lot with Niger. I have been working with them since 2017. And I first asked him what was his experience in the involvement of the DPO in the strategizing and planning of activities and tracking with the multilaterals in Niger, with UNICEF, UNHCR, World Bank. And he said, well, that's easy. We were invited to UNICEF in December. That was the first time they told us what they did in 2021 and what they intended to do in 2022. For the others, it's easy because we have never met them. We see that big words are being used about not only consulting the DPOs or to having them supervise plans and activities, but actually to having them lead efforts. Now, this is one DPO, and we are going to hear from another DPO afterwards, and I hope he has some more encouraging experiences than they do in Niger. But it's evidently striking that when you are not in close consultations with the DPOs, how do you know that you are measuring and monitoring and tracking the things that matters in the lives of disabled people? One way to assure that we are indeed mainstreaming disability inclusion in future operation is to involve disabled people's organization more in, for example, in tracking efforts in general, planning and strategizing, but perhaps also in social auditing. And I think some of the organizations have mentioned that in their interviews with my colleagues, that this type of qualitative approaches may be necessary supplements in the new efforts. So I read in the journal this week that the Norwegian government was asked what do they intend to do with the disability strategy, and most of the place they were very happy about being able to host the summit, of course, and they didn't say all that much about what they were going to do tomorrow. So obviously I have to get into the new strategy like the rest of us. And I really hope, as I said in the introduction, that they do not confuse targeting with charity. The last point I would like to make is that we all know that the development agenda is characterized by a flavor of the day. Disability has been a flavor of the day. There has been orphans, there has been HIV/AIDS, there have been many flavors of the day. Now we've had 2 years of COVID, and I think the decisive element in whether or not we're going to succeed in mainstreaming disability inclusion is the matter if we can manage to regain the momentum for the disability issue on the development agenda after the COVID pandemic. So that would be my final word. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna and Mona, for your insightful input. And Mona, absolutely right. There are a lot of plans and a lot of strategies and a lot of good intentions, but you've got to back them up. You've got to walk the talk. And the one thing is to have the budgets, and then next thing is to see whether those budgets are being spent on the things which have to be spent. And thank you for accentuating the point of stigma as well. And that was very, very crucial. That still stays a major challenge for identification as well as tracking. And what you said, Anna, is spot on. Although it might sound like a cliche, the things which cannot be measured and cannot be reported are often forgotten. So thank you for underscoring that. Now, brief note, Anna, like when you were speaking, your voice was getting a bit muffled. So perhaps you could check the sound quality on your end. That'll be great for the next interventions. And I would like to give the floor to the UNICEF and first for their brief comment on the report, which entails input linked to tracking and inclusion, and which FAFO has prepared on behalf of Atlas. So I'll first hand it over to UNICEF for a couple of minutes, and then after that we could go to UNHCR for their comment on the report, which Anna and Mona were mentioning. Thank you. UNICEF first. Rosangela or Tim?
Thank you so much, Gordon, and good to be here with everybody. We have a PowerPoint, and while we get it, yes, it's here already. I just wanted to start before going specifically to the presentation, saying that UNICEF is doing a lot of effort. What we present here are data from 2018, 19, and 20, as the data from 21 is still being analyzed to be officially published. And so the other important thing that is not part of this presentation is the fact that UNICEF with Norway and Australia launched in November a global report on children with disabilities, a huge data report encompassing survey data from 40 countries, and showing that the number of children with disabilities that we used to refer from 93 million to 115 million in reality is 240 million children with disabilities in the world, of course 80% in developing countries, and this represents 10% of children of the world. So it's a good beginning. It's a baseline for now, what we will do from now on. And so if we can start the presentation. Can you move the slide, please? I don't know who is, here we are. So just based on the results that we have been collecting from the system, right? And this is important, meaning that the country offices are reporting to the UNICEF system. What we have is that the global expenditure on disability inclusion in 2018 was 233 million, and this is money of UNICEF and donors in country, and it was around across 123 countries. In 2019, the number was 213 million across 142 countries, and in 2020, 239 million across 144 countries. We also collect information on some other indicators, for example, the number of children with disabilities that were reached. And now that we have the global report, as Fafa was mentioning, it makes us use data as an important advocacy tool as well. In 2018, we were reaching 1.4 million children over the 123 countries. In 2019, 1.7 million, and in 2020, 2.2 million children with disabilities, which is about 10%, 1% of the number of children in the world. So of course we have to do much more. Number of children with disabilities that were reached with UNICEF-supported cash transfer programs. It's another important program that we are advancing now. We had, I will just give you the numbers for 2020 to be shorter the presentation. We had 826,355 children being benefited from it. Also, the percentage of UNICEF humanitarian response, systematically providing disability inclusive programs and services, is about 44% of the countries working on humanitarian, and it has been growing every year. And the number of children with disabilities provided with assistive technology, also over 152,000 children. It has been growing, but of course we have to do much better, we know. And supported with inclusive education, we had 131 countries in 2020, also growing, and hopefully 2021 will bring even bigger results to us. I just want to complete mentioning that the data study covered 40 countries, about 40 countries, and it will add 20 more in the next 2 years. And with this, I pass to Tim, our expert on Insight, and he will be able to explain the technical process to you. Thank you so much. Tim, please go ahead.
Thank you, Rosangela. And please just confirm if you can hear me.
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Perfect. So I'll just spend a couple of minutes to take you through how we collect these numbers. And this is a system that I think has been mentioned in the report and was also referenced by the colleagues who presented on the report. It's called Insight. It's our internal organizational performance management system. And this is how the screen, the slide that you see on the screen shows how it is structured. So UNICEF, as some of you may know, is a fully results-based oriented organization. Even in the way that we operationalize our work is through results. So you would not see anywhere across our systems or even in many of our reports references to projects and programs. It's usually about outcomes, outputs, and the activities that come out of those processes and interventions. So each and every office is structured this way, where we have the overall office level, and then you have outcomes which come out of our country program documents and other planning documents that we have outlining the priorities of each of the offices or countries that we work in. And then from there you have the outputs, which is really the operational level of the organization. And it's at that level that we assign funding, including funds that come from the variety of donors that we work with, and also the core budgets. At the lowest level, we then have activities which are the interventions negotiated through our engagement with government and civil society organizations to articulate the things that UNICEF can fund. So with that structure in place, we've introduced a set of program codes. And you'll see at the output level, we have, that's where we connect each and every office's outputs to the organization's strategic plan. And we use markers, we use other codes at that level. At the next level down, which is the operational work plan level, we have tags where each and every single activity of the organization is associated with a tag. And one of the key tags at that level is disability. And in this way, using their disability tag, amongst other tags, we are able to look at, if you can just go to the next slide, we are able to answer a number of questions and in a variety of ways. First of all, we are able to answer the question of how much is UNICEF spending on disability programming. We also are able to track very clearly how the activities that are expected to contribute towards disability are being implemented and where they are being implemented and what we are then achieving with them. We have an add-on system to the far left, which is a results assessment module where we have very specific indicators that have been associated to the outputs, and we are able to answer the question, what are our results for disabilities and who are we reaching? You already heard from Rosangela the various numbers of the gap that we have as an organization in the number of children with disabilities that we are reaching. So that's how we are structured, and we are able for all the officers across the organization to answer these questions. The system is quite mature, and it's been there for about 10 years now. We are continuously improving on it, and I'll speak about some of the challenges in a second. If you can just go to the next slide, please. Coming down to the disability tag, and I believe this is common across many other organizations, we expect the output managers or the people who are actually programming in each of the offices to establish for each of the activities the extent to which it is focusing on children with disabilities and or accessibility challenges. And it has these four levels. I have to point out that the data you just saw does not include the one marginally, because that was in our previous strategic plan. So starting in January of 2022, moving on into our current strategic plan duration, we are now also able to include or have colleagues associate each and every activity to, first of all, activities that fully target and focus on children with disabilities, and then those that have a significant focus on children with disabilities. Those that are marginally inclusive of children with disabilities, and then activities that do not at all consider children with disabilities. So in this way, we collect all the financial information and also the results information. And I have to point out that it's mandatory across the board for each of the offices to use this particular tag. Going to the next slide. And so we are able to pick the information and also cross-reference it with the data that's being collected from other tags in the system. In this particular example, you'll see that we're able to cross-reference with information on adolescents and the gender tags. We are able to see how much, the extent to which the expenditure we incurred on COVID-19 is targeting children with disabilities. We're able to do a lot of analysis in that sense. As Rosangela mentioned, we are currently analyzing the 2021 data, and we'll soon be able to provide it as needed. Finally, just to mention some of the challenges, you'll realize that a tag like this is subjective, and it's usually left to the person that's looking at and determining at that point how to associate the activity to it. Should it be significant? Should it be marginal, etc. And so we always face the risk of a colleague selecting the wrong code. And that way it can affect, the numbers that we are able to, in terms of finances, we are able to track on disability. Sometimes it also affects the extent to which we are able to capture the right information. And so there's the continuous need for training colleagues to understand how to associate their activities to the disability tag. We are looking at quality assurance mechanisms being put in place, and I'm glad that Rosangela's team is also really laying out that infrastructure across the organization of colleagues that can be able to support officers when needed. And lastly, we are looking at automating some of the selection of the tags, so that, now with the technology that's available, artificial intelligence and all that, the system can intuitively suggest or propose the right tag for disability. And then either the person that's looking at selecting it can override it or just accept it. So automation might also enable us to improve the quality of the data that comes out. Over back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim and Rosangela, for, first of all, Rosangela, wonderfully fleshed out point that there are 240 million children with disabilities, and out of those 2.4 million are being right now addressed by UNICEF, so only 1%, and there's a long way to go, but the journey has started, and that's the most important thing to accentuate, that it's to start a journey like that. And Tim, a wonderful presentation, quite comprehensive. And thank you for that critically reflexive point at the end about the subjectivity of the tags and the focus on quality assurance, because it's important to collect data, to track inclusion, but you've got to collect the relevant data, and the data has to be reliable, and it should not be to an extent that subjective that it loses validity. So thank you so much for mentioning those two elements. And now I would like to invite Ricardo from UNHCR, because UNHCR was also covered by the FAFO report along with UNICEF. We don't have the representative from the World Bank, but perhaps Ricardo can shed light on the reflections and comments linked to the report. Ricardo, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Gagan, and welcome. Well, thanks for inviting me. Welcome everyone to this short presentation that I will make. First, sharing some comments. Well, on the report, what is important is that reports like this and the ongoing study that is being conducted by Finland on behalf of the Good Humanitarian Donorship Initiative on financing disability inclusion, and in which UNHCR is also taking part of, provide an opportunity to build evidence about opportunities and gaps to monitor disability inclusion. These two studies have helped us, supported us to identify where are we, and in a line, I think that UNHCR is in a turning point where issues that needed to be addressed have been identified, and some of the solutions have been put in place. And they are, we will be putting in place solutions from this year. What stands out to me of the report is that there seems to be a tension between our beliefs and the power of technology and data, and what the reality makes possible to happen in humanitarian contexts, where the objective of protecting and assisting people may prevail against the accuracy of data and on how this is happening. There is a cost in time, human and financial resources in building accurate information about prevalence, access, and expenditure on disability inclusion. And it is still to be shown what would be the cost benefits and the final impact on the rights of persons with disabilities of the level of accuracy of the data that is sometimes expected from multilateral agencies, and that we are expecting as well from member states. So I will present a little bit more in detail now what is the status quo of UNHCR or this current situation. We have identified through these two studies our limitations in systems and our human resources, as well as mentioned by Mona and the researchers, in their capacity to identify and register persons with disabilities, where UNHCR is responsible for refugee registration. Our capacity to monitor both targeted and mainstream initiatives addressed to persons with disabilities is as well limited, and being easier to track targeted assistance than monitoring mainstream assistance. This results in figures that and an impact and financial expenditure that may seem low compared with our teams and partners actually perform in their operations. So UNHCR has been putting in place some solutions that will start into force or will come into force from this year. Some of them have been applied, but results will be more visible from this year, or actually next year when we report back. The first one is on identification of persons with disabilities in registration and other data collection efforts. As many of you will know, providing visibility through a registration process for people who is forcibly displaced is already one step in their protection. And there was a long-standing issue that it was that the methods that we used were unreliable and not producing high prevalence of disability, very low prevalence, around 2% of refugees registered with UNHCR had a disability. So resulting from a commitment that was made at the Global Disability Summit last year, we integrated the UN tool to identify persons with disabilities, and those are the Washington Group questions on disability statistics. They are now integrated in our systems, in our registration system. And during the second summit, Ms. Gillian Triggs, our Assistant High Commissioner for Protection, has shared 10 additional commitments, which includes as well promoting the use of these questions across our reporting mechanisms or registration mechanisms, but as well supporting states in the refugee registration efforts, considering that at the moment there are no refugee statistics disaggregated by disability shared by states' statistical bureau. So that is a clear gap as well in refugee data. We have also developed training package that we expect to roll out in disability inclusion and disability data. And we expect to do it in partnership with the International Disability Alliance as one of our key partners. Our commitments include as well other progress or other enhancement to monitor disability inclusion. For example, there is a new results-based management system in which it introduced a new way of planning, budgeting, monitoring, and reporting on results, similarly to what UNICEF colleagues have been presenting. And the new approach allows to better as well reflect cross-cutting issues in results, such as disability inclusions. Some of the features include one, mandatory disaggregation of core impact and outcome indicators by age, sex, and disability, a global marker as well functionality on disability inclusion, which is not comparable with the OECD marker, unfortunately, as it wasn't published. The OECD marker wasn't available publicly when this solution was being drafted, and this is one of the limitations that we've shared with the researchers as well. And then it integrates as well an age, gender, and diversity dimension, including disability, throughout all content areas of the situation analysis, which will inform strategic planning and producing more qualitative data. That is very important as well and hasn't been contemplated so far. It is important to note as well some advancements or enhancements in partnerships. It's important to know that we work with partners and that in these cases, the responsibility of collecting accurate data and reporting expenses is on their hands. So we have put in place measures such as requesting progress and achievements on disaggregated indicators, including disability, new partnership agreement templates, which include as well data disaggregation, and strengthening as well AGD or age, gender, and diversity reporting, including disability, so we capture more data when we collect results from them. We have strengthened as well in humanitarian response plans and refugee response plans, the guidance and the resources that are available. And in OPD participation that was mentioned in the presentation. So our partnership with the International Disability Alliance, which started formally in 2020 only, opened the door last year to at least 41 representatives of national OPDs and regional OPDs participating in trainings and briefings. Of course, this is a low percentage of the more than 1,400 IDA partners, but it is a very good beginning, and considering as well that organizations of persons with disabilities require capacity building to understand UNHCR's mandate, which is much more complex than what it may seem from an external view, like working only with refugees, etc. As a brief conclusion, I would like to mention that, well, some of these changes will require time to get in place. I would like also to mention that the responsibility and efforts in improving data and quality, there's a word of caution to be shared about our expectations. Putting it in terms of humanitarian principles, there is a tension, I think, between promoting non-discrimination and ensuring that persons with disabilities access assistance and protection on an equal basis with others, which is the focus of this study. The principle of impartiality, where assistance and protection should be provided on the basis of need alone and not on the basis of a particular status, such as disability, as sometimes is understood by colleagues in the fields when they are receiving some pressure from donors in this regard. And finally, the principle of humanity, which defines the purpose of humanitarian action in protecting life, health, and ensuring respect of human rights. I personally share empathy with my colleagues who highlight how challenging it is to ensure accurate data when there are few hours to register and assist thousands of refugees due to restrictions from authorities and security concerns. I think that our expectations in data and technology should also be balanced by this principle of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ricardo, for letting us know the real life situation and telling us the sanguine note that often, we could have expectations that we want the maximum data and in the least amount of time, and we could leverage technology, but sometimes the ground realities are so harsh, so brutal, and as you rightly said, that the person who's collecting the data might have very limited time, resources, and energy to kind of being spent for collecting data in that particular moment and having 1,000 when he or she has to address 1,000 people in a specific day, for instance. So it's very, very important what you mentioned, Ricardo, that we need to focus on getting accurate data and reporting expenses, but at the same time be a bit more sanguine about the ground realities. And perhaps just a note which might be worth sharing, that there's this United Nations Security Council Resolution 2475, which actually gives primacy to disability, or talks about disability and people with disabilities during armed conflict. So perhaps there might be a much more stronger momentum on this field, on collecting data, identifying data, analyzing data moving forward. So the roadblocks are kind of getting reduced, if I may say so. Now, from Geneva, UNHCR, I would like us to take a virtual flight down to Uganda, and perhaps Edson, you could share your perspectives briefly on what you heard from the FAFO report from our colleagues Rosangela and Tim from UNICEF and Ricardo from UNHCR. Edson, floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am happy to participate at this stage. And I want to thank everybody, all the speakers. My quick comment is that systematic disability inclusion will therefore need people's disabilities-centered approach. And because of this, I could read through so many series of issues come from both the report, the UNICEF, UNHCR, and I see that participation, dialogue, and involvement of persons with disabilities is very key in all these things. Why? Because both the findings of the report and its challenges and conclusions are very clear and evident that they require the participation of persons with disabilities and their leaders at higher level. And the higher level, I mean mainstreaming people with disabilities, not at lower levels of the project cycles and policy and guidance notes, but rather at a higher decision-making table where decisions are being made. So maybe a sort of a think tank around disability issues and how they can be systematically included in oral intervention would be very, very critical. So I think moving forward, once all these are said and done, the commitment is very key from all of us. Commitment to disability issues is very key. We can talk about this, you can talk about that, but commitment to disability issues is very, very key. And it is a matter of the heart of hearts of our people that we're talking about. In conclusion, I think I would want to say that once the rights of persons with disabilities are clearly integrated, then we need to have a community of practice that we can learn from that is disability inclusive. For example, if I met a disability inclusion on the road, would I tell that this is actual disability inclusion? So this is what we need, all of us, to engage with the concerned people with disabilities to ensure that the dialogue was. My experience has been that the dialogue has been very limited in all cases. If we dialogued on all these issues we are talking about, most likely we would have got person disability-centered interventions, and we would see success around disability inclusion. Thank you.
Much, Edson, for mentioning the significance of dialogue and the question of heart. And I would like to circle back to what Ricardo said about the principle of humanity and empathy, and persons with disabilities have human dignity and human worth, and the same drive towards human flourishing. We got to appreciate that and have a human rights-based conversation when it comes to inclusion and tracking inclusion. Now from Edson in Uganda, we'll take a brief, or a rather long virtual tour back to Norway, to our very own Karianne, who works for Atlas Alliance. And Karianne could share perhaps her perspectives in brief about baselining and from the TOEFI consortium. What are the significant observations? Karianne, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Gagan. Can you see my screen? Yeah, I think so. This is. So today, as Gagan says, I'm the senior advisor for M&E here at the Atlas Alliance. And today I'm going to share some of our experiences in conducting our baseline evaluation study, where disabled persons organizations were actively involved throughout the process. So first, as a background, the Together for Inclusion project is currently being carried out in Ethiopia, Mozambique, Niger, Somalia, South Sudan, and Uganda. And the program is being delivered through a consortium composed of Norwegian disabled persons organizations and some of the largest NGOs in Norway. An important feature of the consortium is that DPOs and NGOs work together in all areas of the program, and that DPOs should be in the lead. As part of this large project, we wanted to also take the opportunity to strengthen the capacity of our DPOs and partners in collecting data on disability. So with a focus on collecting quality data on disability, we've developed a comprehensive M&E system. As part of the system, we conduct a baseline and endline study using standard tools that have been developed with extensive input from the consortium partners and from our DPOs. And we've also developed a monitoring system, which allows us to track our reach against key outputs, For example, we can track the number of times an individual per type of disability has received training. But today I wanted to focus on the participatory approach in which we prepared for and conducted our baseline studies. Here, DPOs were directly involved in everything from developing the relevant tools to recruiting enumerators and co-facilitating the enumerator trainings. They were also involved in overseeing the actual data collection and in reviewing findings afterwards. In Mozambique and Uganda, staff from our DPO partners held the role as study leads. And so the study was conducted through 4 core components in all 6 countries. We have our community survey, which is a quantitative survey conducted with adults with disabilities and adults without disabilities. The survey questionnaire includes the Washington Group enhanced set of questions which are relevant for the project. Using this tool, we surveyed a total of 4,850 people, out of which 1,935 persons with disabilities. We also conducted focus group discussions with a total of 208 adults with disabilities, out of which 102 were men and 106 were women. Also, another important part of the study is the inclusive education assessment. This was conducted in all of our target schools to help to identify specific requirements needed to improve their inclusivity. Our study reflects the findings from a total of 212 schools. Finally, we conducted an organizational capacity assessment with a total of 44 disabled persons organizations. So the DPOs and our partners were themselves responsible for carrying out the organizational capacity assessment and the inclusive education assessments with the school. For the other tools, we hired external enumerators, and our DPOs were part in training these enumerators. So as you can understand, this was a complex multi-country study. Adding to the complexity was the fact that we were in the middle of the COVID pandemic. There was unrest and security concerns in Niger, Somalia, and South Sudan. And in Mozambique and in Uganda, we were required to go through a longer process to get the study approved by a national research committee. Despite this complexity, we were able to carry out the study successfully with the reward of accessing high quality data, which can inform our project. And we believe that the active role of our DPOs and partners influenced the success of this study. And also shortly before I end my presentation, I want to take the opportunity to say a few words about how we plan to track inclusion using our routine monitoring system. So we have developed a digital system where we can register the number of people that we reach across our interventions. We register participants that attend our trainings or are reached by our activities in another way and connect this to our key outputs. We apply unique identifying code to ensure that we track this information in a way that is anonymous. The data then can later be aggregated, and it's possible to pull out reports directly from the system using Power BI. And in this way, the system will facilitate and allow us to track inclusion in terms of how many people we are reaching, disaggregated by disability. So I've shared a screenshot of our baseline report in the slide. And if you'd like to read more and learn about how we work with M&E, we're happy to share this with you. So please get in touch with us, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Kayana, for that insightful presentation. The key word is participatory approach, which you mentioned, and this is Together for Inclusion project is an innovation in itself, because for the first time we have DPOs in lead, and there's a walking the talk which happens here when it comes to tracking inclusion, monitoring inclusion. And that's very, very crucial. And if you want to know more about it, there's a side event taking place tomorrow on this theme, which our dear colleague Iron Kalstad will be moderating. So check it out. That's important. And now I'll hand over to Matthias from NORAD, the Norwegian Agency for Development and Cooperation, very important donor agency and very crucial for the Together for Inclusion project. Matthias, I'm realizing that the time is ticking. Clock is ticking, time is slipping away. So perhaps your intervention, if you could have it a little brief or terse, that'll be fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Gagan. I'll try to be brief. So first of all, I just wanted to address the strategy. There was some speculation on its content at the beginning of the meeting. It does lay forward a twin track approach. We will continue to support targeted initiatives, but it has an emphasis on mainstreaming disability inclusion more broadly across our work. In the strategy, we lay out 3 strategic components that we think are particularly important for all of our effort on disability inclusion, and that's addressing stigma and attitudes. This needs to be considered across all areas of work. The second is meaningful engagement. And the third is accountability. And on accountability, we address both the need for results reporting and data, and also for tracking. You might have noticed Prime Minister Støre mentioning that we will track our efforts when he presented the strategy at the Global Disability Summit earlier today. We address tracking and results reporting as separate headings because they are different. And I think it's helpful to keep that in mind when we discuss it. One informs what we do and the other what we achieve. And sometimes we support, and we should continue to support, activities where the results reporting is not readily available. I think Ricardo brought up some examples of areas where this is not currently possible. And then being able to track and monitor provides the accountability that we are doing something, that our partners are carrying out activities to give meaning to the ambitions or desires to achieve inclusion. And preferably when we have both the tracking, when we can follow both the expenditure and the precise activities and compare it to the results, then we can inform the evidence on what works. And this is perhaps particularly important when we mainstream. With targeted interventions, we usually have a very clear idea of what the specific actions are to be undertaken, what we expect the outcomes to be. When we mainstream disability inclusion in broader work, for example, education or health or on climate change, being able to have an idea of what the specific activities that are undertaken are will help us aggregate the evidence and inform what works and what doesn't. And that's important for us. If I'm allowed to, Gagan, I know the clock is ticking. I wanted to touch on Morten's, I think he called it a dark speculation that in 2018, when some 3% of our support was tagged with a disability marker, the OECD-DAC disability marker, whether the remaining 97% was disability excluding. And I'm confident in claiming that I don't think it is. And one example would be the World Bank, where the researchers presented that they were not readily able to present how much expenditure they have on disability inclusion. They still have very clear commitments on making, for example, their work on education disability inclusive, and that's clearly defined in their accountability framework. Also, with the use of the disability marker, part of this why it doesn't necessarily capture everything that we do that is inclusive is it does not have the third category that the UNICEF system has. So the UNICEF system that Tim and Rosangela presented, they have main objective, significant objective, and a marginally inclusive objective. And the disability tag from OECD-DAC does not have this third one. So it misses some programs and activities or agreements that we think are inclusive, but that we do not tag. And I finally wanted to touch briefly on the promise of technology and feeding this into the running system. We have been using the disability marker since its inception. We are getting better at it because someone addressed the subjectivity of coding. But we think there's also a need to work on this with our partners and our other agencies to be more consistent in how we code, not just internally, but also across agencies and units to aid its comparability. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthias, for your insightful presentation and nuanced presentation with regards to tracking and reporting explanation. That was very clarifying. And also, I agree with you, perhaps it's not as dark as it seems, that the 97% is disability exclusionary Norwegian International Development Aid, and perhaps that's not what it is like. So thanks for clarifying that to the audience, and also focusing on the accountability aspect and what Prime Minister Støre said in the morning, the tracking will be given a priority. Now I'll hand it over to Morten. Morten, this is what happens when we have extremely insightful guests who could share invaluable perspectives, that we always run short of time. The floor is yours, Morten. You take it away from here, and then perhaps I could come and wrap up the conversation later on.
Well, thank you very much. We have 3 more minutes to go. First of all, thank you to FAFO for delivering a report that we can learn a lot from, that we will keep both reading and discussing after this meeting, because as the report points to, and as Matthias correctly says, we have a big job to do. I agree with Matthias. The picture is not as dark as I kind of touched upon at the beginning, but that's because I know that it's a wake-up call when we turn these numbers upside down. But of course, they cannot give the correct picture, because if you look at inclusion in humanitarian assistance in Norway, it's reported that less than 1% is inclusive of persons with disabilities. And that's objectively wrong. So, but that challenges us, invites us to continue the work, where probably UNICEF has come the furthest, and we can learn from UNICEF. But there's one issue I would like to discuss in our next meeting. On the way to UNICEF's better system, I do not understand why you as multilaterals do not support the OECD DAC marker. Today we heard EU saying that several of their countries now will start using the marker. And the way this is presented in the report on, I think we have to start with the DAC marker, aiming at doing it better, because this is a big issue to enter into. So, but I'm just very thankful to UNICEF for sharing, UNHCR for sharing. And of course, Matthias, you always contribute very clearly to the issues we raise. So we look forward to, and Edson in Uganda too. We look forward to continuing the dialogue both with you and maybe mostly with the Norwegian donor, but also with the rest of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Morten, for this summary points. And you have raised a very important issue about the OECD DAC marker, but that means that now we might have to invite Ricardo, Matthias, Rosangela, Tim, and Edson again for another webinar, perhaps when the GDS dust settles down in the next couple of weeks or so. So yeah. Thank you so much for this. I really appreciate your input. It was really insightful to all the people who participated in this, all the audience members who were following it, to the sign language interpreters, live captioners. Rohit, thank you for your technical facilitation. And as I mentioned, that this was a conversation taking place across 3 continents, North America, Europe, and Africa. And one thing which we've got to be very happy about is that we made it work without any major technical glitches. So something which we should all look forward to. Hopefully tomorrow GDS would be, the day would be a lot more smooth. Thank you, and bye-bye from Oslo. Hoping to meet you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.